Cool. Okay. Hello. Okay. Hi, guys. I'm very excited to see all your faces. I'm Hessy, or Hess my Fisser, but I go by Hessy, so we're going to go with that for today. This workshop is meant to be an introduction to what neurodiversity is. And with that being said, I expect quite a few of you to be neurodivergent and need to maybe move around or just need to do what you got to do to be comfortable. And I want to really encourage that. So if you need to leave early to go be with your kids, or if you need to move around to be comfortable, please do so. You won't be distracting me. And if you do, I will just take a minute because that's okay sometimes. And like Lauren said, we are recording this. And at the end of this workshop, we will have some time for questions. And we are going to stop the recording during that time. So you can feel free to ask your questions without knowing that it's going to be recorded. Right, so I am Hessy, and today, okay, there we go. And today we're going to be following the following schedule. First, sorry, I've never worn one of these before. Hello, is this fine? Is this better? Cool. Okay. I'm so professional, guys. Clearly. So today we're going to be following, I'm just going to give a quick disclaimer. I'm going to talk about where my information that I'm giving to you comes from, who I am as a person and as a professional, I guess. And then we're going to have a little bit of a look about what language we use when we talk about neurodiversity and why we use the language that we do. And then we're going to look at your 3 most common neurodevelopmental disorders. Sorry, is the sound fine? Am I like... Cool, okay, right. So the 3 most common neurodevelopmental disorders that we will be looking at is ADHD, specific learning disorders, which includes dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and then my personal favorite, autism spectrum disorder. And then we'll have some time for questions. Right, so let's move on to the disclaimer. So I am, and my knowledge for this talk comes from being, sorry, I just want to change this because I'm a little bit blind, comes from being a 3rd year undergrad student in psychology and counseling. I've also worked in inclusive education for the past 5 years, being a mentor, facilitator, and consultant for various schools to be more inclusive in terms of neurodevelopmental disabilities as well as physical disabilities. I am also an advocate online and just in general spaces, advocating for more inclusivity and making spaces comfortable for neurodiverse people. And then finally, I am a member of the neurodiverse community in that I have autism, I have ADHD, and I have dyslexia. And my husband and my best friends and all of these people are also neurodiverse people, and that's part of where a lot of this comes from, is talking to the community and hearing what psychology says, but also hearing what the community has to say about these things, because I believe in community-based education. I want to make it very clear that I cannot diagnose psychiatric or neurodevelopmental conditions, so please do not ask me about a specific case or ask me to do that, because I cannot do that. I also cannot provide counseling or therapy directly. I'm not qualified to do that. Next year I will be, but not yet. I will not comment on a specific case from up here. I want to respect people's privacy, and while we can talk about cases in general or questions in general, we don't want to be like, okay, cool, I have a 13-year-old named Hessy and this is her situation. I want to respect people's privacy in that sense. And then finally, I'm only going to be answering questions related to the psychosocial side of conditions, but please don't make that hesitant to ask your questions still. If I can't answer it, I'll just say that, and that's okay. We all should know our limitations. So let's look at language. Right, so what I have included today and the language that I'm using today comes from what is expected from the psychology community, as well as what are the general preferences of the neurodiverse community. Again, when I say that, each person is going to have different preferences, so I'm not going to pretend that everybody is going to have the same preference for these specific languages. But that being said, I want to really encourage you to generally follow these principles. But if somebody who is neurodivergent or is autistic prefers to follow a different label or a different choice of language, just go with what they prefer, right? Cool. So the first one is what I want to define as what is neurodiversity, right? So neurodiversity refers to a neurological or brain difference that is commonly associated with ADHD, autism, and learning disabilities. It is not a medical diagnosis. So where the word comes from is neurodevelopmental disorders, which is a classification of disorders in the handbook we use to diagnose things. But neurodiversity itself is not a medical diagnosis. So anybody can call themselves neurodivergent. And if that label fits you, I encourage you to use it, right? That is something anybody can use. Where we get a little bit more specific is we don't really want to refer to ourselves as I am so autistic, or I am so ADHD, or I am so OCD, for having certain behaviors that relate to a condition. And the reason why we're doing that is because these are not adjectives, these are medical diagnoses. We're not going to say, I am paralyzed, when you're not really paralyzed or haven't been diagnosed with paralysis. And part of this is when we do use those words, we can offend some people with these conditions and make them feel like their struggle isn't being heard, and that's why I discourage that use in general. Then I really like the word disability, and I think there's a lot of people who stray away from this word, but disability is not a bad word. It is a word to describe a difference in abilities that requires accommodations. And neurodevelopmental disorders are disabilities. There's no way around that. And by calling them what they are, by calling them disabilities, we are enabling the people who have these disorders to get the support they need. And again, this is a word I'm very comfortable and that the general community encourages, but a certain person with a neurodevelopmental disorder might not like that word. So we're going to respect the choices of individuals in this sense. Next, I want to refer to meltdowns. So meltdowns are a specific response due to being unable to process sensory, emotional, or other stimulation. So they can be emotional explosions, the way we think of tantrums. That is what a meltdown can look like. Or it can be a shutdown, where you aren't able to interact with other people and you aren't able to communicate. We don't want to use the word tantrum because tantrum implies that something is wanting to be gained through this behavior, which is not the case. I feel like I'm doing this wrong. Is that fine? I'm like really scared that I'm going to break this. Okay. Right. Cool. Okay. Bear with me, guys. I haven't used this before, but I'm really excited to. I feel very professional. Right, okay. So we stray away from the word, we move away from the word tantrum because a tantrum implies that we want to gain something with the behavior. But a meltdown is something completely out of your control. So we want to call them what they are again, so that the people who have them can get the help they need. Then functioning labels, and this specifically refers to more related to autism section. We don't want to use terms like high functioning or low functioning because they do one of two things. Either they underestimate the abilities of the person that we're dealing with, or they can be seen as a way of minimizing the struggles of somebody who's labeled as high functioning. So I'll refer a bit more to how we'd rather refer to these in the autism section, but generally we rather focus on support needs, so lower support needs or higher support needs or something of the kind. And then the last one is ASPE. So ASPE comes from the word Asperger's syndrome, but Asperger's syndrome is no longer classified as an official diagnosis nor a medical condition. And the reason for that is actually a fun fact, is the word Asperger's comes from Dr. Asperger's, who was a Nazi doctor who experimented on autistic people and labeled the ones who he deemed worthy of life as Asperger's, and the rest of them were, well, we all know what happened. So we want to stray away from that word because it can be seen as offensive, and it is related to saying that autistic people might not be worthy of life, which is obviously not the case. Some people in the autistic community have reclaimed the word in the term Aspie, and again, we respect that when that is what people function with, but generally people don't really like it to be referred to as Asperger's because of the negative connotation. Right, cool. So let's get into this. What is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, also known as ADHD? So ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder that is characterized by difficulties in attention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. ADHD is the most common things spoken about in terms of neurodevelopmental disorders, and our society has very much, I want to say, in a way, normalized this, which is fantastic. We love to talk about these things and see them as just a normal part of development. Approximately 2.5 to 3.5% of people have ADHD or have been diagnosed with ADHD. Specialists claim that the statistics of people who actually have the condition but have not been diagnosed is closer to 10% of our population, which is a very large portion if you think about it. Like, think of the amount of people you know, 1 in 10 of those people are likely ADHD. Right, so ADHD is also somewhat of a newer name for things that used to be classified completely separately. So there are 3 subtypes of ADHD. You have predominantly hyperactive or impulsive type. And this is what we think of when we think traditionally ADHD. The people who can't sit still and are driven by a motor and continue moving and, shake their heads and run marathons, hint, hint, dad, and do things like that. Those are your hyperactive people. Then we have the predominantly inattentive type, which is your daydreamer. You know, the kid that can make up stories in their mind and think about these amazing things, and in the meantime, they're not listening to a single word you're saying, and it doesn't frustrate you at all because you're a perfect human being. Yeah, no, those are your predominantly inattentive types. And our predominantly inattentive type of ADHD is actually what used to be called ADD, so attention deficit disorder. So attention deficit disorder from 2013 is no longer considered as an official diagnosis. Instead, everything is classified into ADHD with subtypes. And part of the reason why we're doing that is because it's easier to get treatment when we have less random things saying, and have one code for it in the medical system and one idea of what the general treatment plan is. The other reason why we do that is because the same mechanisms in the brain underline the difficulties of these conditions. So when we have the same mechanisms underlying a disease or disorder, we can use similar treatment plans for them, and that is why we classify them as one, so that research can be conducted in unison and that we're not doing various random parts of research. Then the last type, and actually the most common type of ADHD, is the combined inattentive and hyperactive impulsive type. And, sorry. I get too excited and then I just keep talking, and I should take a breath sometimes. Anyways, so the combined inattentive and hyperactive impulsive types, this is your most common type, which is also part of the reason why we classify them together, is because they're very much coexisting. And you can be hyperactive in some areas and very inattentive in other areas. I am a very excitable person, and I have been diagnosed with the combined inattentive hyperactive disorder. So I'm constantly fidgeting, using my hands, moving my legs, struggling to sit still. But also my inattentive type comes in the form of ideas. I'll be sitting in something that I deem boring or just like not stimulating enough and thinking of the brand new business idea that I just came up with that obviously is going to revolutionize the world. Bearing in mind, I do not have a single business, but that's okay. It keeps my brain busy, and that's all that really matters. But yeah, so the impact of this is going to differ from age groups, from person to person, but it's much more than what we think of normally when we think of ADHD, because ADHD infects every aspect of your life. The one we mostly think of is how it affects school or work. But actually, social implications are probably your largest thing that you hear from ADHD people as a complaint or an inability that they are struggling with. Because if you are hyperactive, impulsive type, you will be interrupting people the whole time because you don't have the natural self-control to not do that, because you're so excited to share your story, which is fantastic, but can be considered very rude and does influence relationships. There's also the thing of oversharing, again, because those, oh, great, I relate to you, so now I'm going to share absolutely everything, even though you didn't ask me. That's fantastic and can make ADHD people bond very, very fast. But if you're working with an ADHD person and a neurotypical person, if I'm oversharing about my bathroom habits, you probably won't enjoy that if you are neurotypical. Frankly, you might not enjoy that if you're neurodivergent still. But that's okay. Anyways, there's also the zoning out aspect, which is more common for the inattentive type. So truly wanting to listen what somebody says, but having this bright idea in your brain, or thinking about the next Dungeons and Dragons game that you're going to be writing for your wife and your best friend, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, my husband. But hey, that's okay. Again, we understand these things and we can accommodate these things, but if you don't understand them, if somebody is not accommodating to them, it can be truly difficult to form good social relationship. There's also the thing of missing social cues because you don't have the attention to pay attention to them. Body language differences, you should probably leave now cues, all of those things. Those are things that ADHD people struggle with and that we don't really think about, and that can just be seen as obnoxious or rude, which isn't the case at all. Then forgetting important dates. I just want to clarify that the stories I use of my husband in this conversation is done with much love, and he has consented to me being allowed to use them. And the stories I use of anybody else in this talk as well is done with consent of those people, and with much love as examples to help explain things. Now, let's get back to my story. So, my husband cannot remember any dates except for his own birthday, my birthday, and our wedding anniversary, which is great for me, but for his parents, that's a little bit offensive. But that's why they make calendar apps, right? The last thing here is rejection sensitivity, and that's kind of a big word and sounds kind of funny, right? But rejection sensitivity refers to assuming things are done with malicious intent when they are not. So if somebody can't make it to your birthday party, it's because of your actions. It's not because they are just busy. Or if somebody gives you criticism, you feel personally attacked when that's not the intention at all. And again, this is something that can very much influence self-esteem and relationships. Then school and work one is something that is, again, something more common that we think about when we think about ADHD. So missing important information. I have worked with so many children who are brilliant and very mathematically inclined, but because they miss the foundations of how you do long division or algebra when they were in grade 3, 4, 5, 6, they can't do grade 10 math. And that's not their fault. That is just they have missed information, and they need to be given that information in a way that makes sense to them to be able to go on. So that's something that really does have an impact long term. Another thing is missing deadlines and due to time blindness. So time blindness refers to, I honestly don't know how long ago something was given or how long it is until another thing. We often hear ADHD people say that this event must have been 3 months ago when it was 2 years ago. And part of the reason for that is because ADHD people feel things really intensely, which is really cool. And they rely on those emotions to tell them how long it has been since this event or until this event. But those emotions are so strong that they don't follow the normal timeline that they do for neurotypical people, which often results in a time blindness situation. There's also decreased productivity. Imagine how productive you would be if you were constantly working at 3 things at the same time. Do we think this would have been a very easy thing to do? Well, don't look at me like that, mama. Also, another great cue, my mom's in the front row, and she makes very interesting faces when she refers to things that I say and my own neurodiversity. So if you do get bored during my talk, just look at her face. It's a fantastic distraction. They can come sit forward, it's fine. Then obviously decreased productivity, procrastinating. I'm going to get to part of the ADHD diagnosis is delaying tasks that are mentally challenging because your brain struggles with the attention needed for those tasks. Then also severe difficulties planning, because you're constantly losing track of what needs to happen next. So that's a very big thing in terms of executive functioning. And planning also refers to how do I write an answer to a comprehension? How do I write an essay? And those are things that really need to be addressed directly in a way that that child or that person understands, because they will not come naturally, simply put. In terms of personal things, you often feel like you have to hide the annoying parts of yourself. You have to pretend that you know what's going on. You have to pretend that you're picking up on social cues. And that creates a lot of stigma and a lot of very bad feelings of inadequacy and feeling broken and things like that. There's also a proneness to mental health struggles because of not being treated for ADHD and not having your ADHD understood and just feeling like, I am a problem as a human being because you don't know what to call yourself. And this is something I'm very passionate about is actually using labels, right? Because if we don't call it ADHD, we're going to call it laziness. We're going to call it being rude. We're going to call it inadequacy. We're going to call it boring. We're going to call it useless. But ADHD is a much more neutral and helpful label because we know how to support you with an ADHD label. We don't necessarily know how to do that when we call you other things. There's also a lot of issues with self-care because you lose track of time and you struggle to prioritize. So especially children with ADHD often have trouble remembering to brush their teeth, taking showers for the appropriate amount of times, washing everything when they're in the shower, and stuff like that. I've had kids where we've actually had to create little laminated cards of all the steps they need to follow when they do take a shower. Otherwise, they just forget, and that's okay. But we can work around that, right? And the last thing I want to mention here is a need for dopamine release. And that dopamine can come from many things. It can come from overeating. It can come from healthy things like exercise, but it can also come from substance abuse. Because the ADHD brain is more prone to addiction, and that has created somewhat of a myth that ADHD medications make you more prone to substance abuse, which is not the case at all. It's that your brain is seeking dopamine, and when that dopamine is not given to you in a way that is healthy, you will find it in a different way, and that could be substance abuse. So I don't want to scare you, like not everybody who's ADHD is going to get addicted to a substance, but it is a potential thing, and that's why we want to find coping strategies and healthy ways of getting that dopamine release. Right, cool. So then the ADHD tax. This list comes from a lot of conversations I've had with people and research, but there are a lot of financial implications to having ADHD. The cost of interventions, the cost of medication, the cost of replacing things that you lose is a very common thing I face, actually, and a very common thing you'll see in a lot of ADHD people. If you have an ADHD kid, how many pens have you bought this year? Think about that. Like, you're counting that stuff up, hey? Stop laughing at me, Mommy. I'm trying. Then late fees. So we've paid quite substantial amounts of fines on normal fees because some people forget to pay them. There's also impulse purchases, and this you see a lot in ADHD women and crafting. I have a friend who has a new hobby almost every week, and that costs a lot of money. There's also constantly changing interests, which falls into that, and then extra petrol from missing turns, from driving to the wrong location, from forgetting your cell phone at home and having to turn back. All of those things. Replacing food that you forgot about, that is a very big issue in my house. Takeout meals because you forgot to cook, which is a real thing that happens. I promise it was not intentional. And then subscription renewal services that you just no longer use that you forgot about. These are all things that add up real quickly. Now, I want to talk about some of the signs of ADHD for different age groups. And I want to really preface here, which is why I have a very big important stamp on my screen, in that just because you have one or two of these doesn't mean you're ADHD. Please don't diagnose yourself with ADHD. You can be neurodivergent. It's an all-inclusive label. But no, ADHD refers to when these symptoms have a clinically significant impact on your life. So when we're looking at this, according to diagnostic criteria, we're looking at least 6 of these in the areas, and they need to really impact your life consistently. So 1 or 2 times forgetting your phone at home, that is normal. There's nothing wrong with you. In fact, if you don't do that, you're probably more concerning. So it's fine. But it's when these things become a consistent problem, that is when we think, that's when we seek help. That's when we're thinking of a name like ADHD. So I'm not going to go through all of them. And you guys have been sent, for those of you who signed up for this talk, you have been sent the PowerPoint via email. It was sent out this morning. If you did not receive it, then you probably didn't give your email or your email is wrong. Please send me an email after this and I can send it to you privately. So constantly fidgeting, moving feet, squirming, whirling, that's quite a big thing in kids, but we want to think about this in an age-appropriate manner. We're not going to say that a child who is 3 should be sitting still for the same amount of time as a child who is 10. That would be irrational. That would be problematic, right? So we're thinking of things very much in the context of what is appropriate for age. A big thing I want to draw attention to here is difficulties with sharing and waiting turns. If you have impulsivity issues, you're not going to want to share because why would I share? Because I can't rationalize it out that I can get a turn later or that there is more later because it's about the now impact of it, not about the later impact of it. And the other thing is not being able to wait your turn in conversational games. They want to be involved and that's okay. But there's this impulsivity going now, which obviously plays a massive impact in their ability to make friends. Another big thing is difficulty with completing tasks or doing things quietly. I always used to narrate what I did or just like talk obscene amounts to the dogs. And yeah, no, that was really weird, but that's okay. And then completing tasks because you have this bright new idea to go to this very different thing, even though that thing's not complete. But it doesn't matter because I have a new idea. And before I even get there, I'm thinking about this and this and this and this and this. And again, that's okay. We just want to assist those kids to still make sure that they are able to function in a society where we are expected to complete things. Then for teenagers, there's a lot of stuff obviously involved here. Sorry. I'm sorry, guys. It's okay. You guys had time to read. So, avoiding mentally taxing tasks is quite a big one here. So, avoiding the homework that requires you to get your attention to a specific point because it's really hard to do that. Procrastination, very big difficulties with emotions, right? Because you're feeling those emotions and you don't necessarily have that self-control to control the reaction to the emotion. You're going to see outbursts. You're going to see, I hate you. How dare you? You're a horrible mom. I'm very sorry. Thank you. You're going to see all of this stuff in in ADHD teenagers. You're also going to see a lot of risk taking with ADHD teenagers because they're seeking that dopamine. Because ultimately, ADHD is all about the dopamine, all about the feeling good hormone. And it's not really about what happens after that because the brain doesn't think that far. And that is why with these kids, good values are really important. Having plans in place for what do you do if you did make a mistake? Because they are going to make mistakes. Every child will. But you need to have a plan for what happens if that does happen and how do we fix it? Because that is the big thing, is everything's fixable. So we have to have plans in place to support that. You also see a lot of careless mistakes in academic work. Things like putting a minus where plus should be, lack of punctuation, that type of stuff. And then constantly starting new hobbies and forgetfulness. In adults, we have very similar symptoms to that of teenagers. ADHD symptoms for adults tend to peak when they're in emerging adulthood. So when they finish school to when they are being settled in their first big boy job, right? That is where we see a peak of ADHD symptoms, because during that time, all the systems you built in childhood and adolescence, those disappear. You are now expected not only to focus on academic work, but you're also expected to drive a car and cook, which that's a scam. Like, why do we need to eat every day? I really feel like that is a scam, but okay. Like I said, everything you'll see, but ADHD symptoms tend to decline somewhat when systems are put in place as you find new things in your new stage of life. So you'll see some, by middle adulthood, you'll see not that ADHD disappears, but the impact the symptoms have are less because you have the systems in place to deal with them. There's also a big thing here is issues in relationships, difficulties in relationships because of impulsivity, because of the things we've discussed, as well as regular incidents or accidents, that type of thing, and difficulties with money. That is a very big part. So financial literacy is a very big part of having ADHD people have good quality of life in adulthood, because impulse purchases are a thing. Difficulties with understanding money as this abstract concept is also very much a thing here. So what can our community do to support those with ADHD? Well, first of all, avoid judgment. And when I say that, it means that we're not saying that just because you're ADHD, you have an excuse to do whatever you want. Not at all. We're saying we're understanding the impact ADHD has on you while still having an expectation of you to be a functional human being, right? My big motto throughout this is it is not an excuse, it is an explanation. It is not an excuse for you to not try. It is not an excuse for you to behave badly. But it does explain why you need extra support in this area, and it does explain why this might be a difficulty for you. And that does help us build a society that is more inclusive. Another thing is accept and encourage coping behaviors. I've seen a lot of teachers be very upset when kids fidget. I've seen a lot of teachers be very upset when kids don't complete their homework on time. And that's valid, that's fair. But we need to still encourage those coping behaviors. We also want to ask what we can do to be more accommodating. Do you need to sit at the back of the church so that you can move more? Do you need to have a fidget toy? Do you need some bathroom breaks? We want to send out reminders about important information. That's more on an organizational level. We want to keep on reminding people of the things. We also want to offer an opportunity to release hyperactivity, which is why I'm going to ask you all to stand up. Shake it out. And sit down when you want to. You don't have to, right? We also want to be willing to find solutions. So be willing to problem solve with people and be willing to have conversations about the uncomfortable things, about not flushing the toilet and forgetting to brush your teeth. We want to have those and we want to find solutions to those. And we want to give, in boring environments, we want to give additional responsibilities or tasks. So this is specifically important in educational environments where we want to say, I can see you're really struggling to sit still. Can you help me identify the kids who might need extra help with their math homework? Stuff like that. on a screen over here, I have some additional resources linked for ADHD and how you can help manage that. And all of them have links to websites and so on. So let's move on to the next one, which is specific learning disorders. Right, so specific learning disorders are when a big gap exists between personal academic achievement and what is expected of someone of the same age and intelligence. And the big thing here is there is a gap. So somebody with a specific learning disorder is not less intelligent, not at all. In fact, Albert Einstein was dyslexic. He had a specific learning disorder. And we knew this because there's a big gap of what is expected of somebody of that level of intelligence compared to what we see in his writing because of lack of punctuation, inabilities to spell, that type of thing. And there's this almost like this stigma that people with learning disabilities are less intelligent, and it frustrates me so much because if you look at the literal diagnostic criteria for it, it means that you are capable of so much more, but something is hindering you, and this is what is hindering you. And specific learning disabilities or disorders are characterized into 3 groups. So impairments in reading, impairments in expression, so in communicating verbally or writtenly, and then impairments in mathematics. In South Africa, it is estimated that 5 to 15% of people have a specific learning disability, which again is a very large portion. If you're going to go to your local school and ask how many of their pupils have specific learning disorders or concessions for these disorders, it will be less than 1%. So you'll see the massive gap we have in these things. And part of that gap is because our educational system doesn't understand the diagnostic criteria that we have for these things. I was not diagnosed with dyslexia until I was 16 years old. And the reason for that is because I continued to achieve top 3 academically from grade 1 to matric. So how on earth could she have dyslexia if she's achieving well? But then if you look at my marks compared to mathematics and Afrikaans, you would see maybe a 20% gap. Not because I'm not capable, but because I physically could not spell. I could not read until I was 9 or 10 years old, right? Which is old, right? And the reason why we found that out is because my dad, who's at the back over there, hi Daddy, he bought me the Ronald Dahl Matilda book while we were on holiday. And he came to sit down with me and asked me to read the first page. And I could read the word D, or the, and that's about it. And how I got away with it from grade 1 to grade 3 was because I could memorize the books the teacher read in class. So I would make a mistake between synonyms and change one word for another, but I could get away with it. And that's the big thing with this, is just because you have a learning disability doesn't mean you're not intelligent. And when my dad sat with me, somebody with no background in how to teach, during that 3 weeks of holiday, he was able to teach me how to read because he sat with me one-on-one and didn't expect me, like the educational system did, to understand phonetics the way they taught it. He explained it to me the way I responded to it. And that is the big thing with a lot of specific learning disabilities. There will always be an impairment, but we can work around that if we explain it in a way that that child understands. So the first one is impairments in reading, which is dyslexia, which is the one we know most about. Most people, they don't really know the difference between dyslexia and dysgraphia, but I'm going to give it to you. So you guys are all in on the secret, apparently, that we're keeping from people. But dyslexia impacts reading accuracy, so being able to accurately read a sentence, and then also reading rate and fluency, right? So on screen over there, that is what it feels like to me when I read something. Can you try read that? Can you try understand that? I mean, if you try hard enough, you could probably make it out. But could you imagine the mental effort it takes to constantly have to do that when you're reading? Now at the age, I'm not that old, but when I now need to read around 800 pages of academic articles a week for my degree, imagine doing that with feeling that way. So there are other things in place, like e-readers, which means I can achieve perfectly. I can read it because I'm listening to it. I'm not physically trying to read it. And that's such an easy thing to do. It's built into your computer already. But if you don't know that somebody's struggling with this, you aren't going to give them that option. The other thing is comprehension. So while I can read necessarily, it's really hard for me to take it in when I read out loud. To this day, I do not read out loud if I am not forced to do so. But this is different for every dyslexic person. My husband also has dyslexia. He loves reading out loud. He will be the first one to volunteer at Bible study, while I will physically hide my head as low as I can because I am terrified of being able to read, being asked to read it loud. And that has a very big social impact on students in school. Because if you are constantly wondering about trying to get the words right and reading when you are asked to read in class, you are not paying attention to the work. You are not being able to focus that whole day because you're filled with such anxiety that your friends are going to make fun of you, which is something that happened to me so often. And a very easy concession to make there is just don't have the child read out loud in class. It's so simple. But we're not going to know that unless we know that they are struggling. The next one is difficulties. Oh, no, this isn't the next one. These are the 3 common ways that people with dyslexia read, right? So you can either have difficulty with spacing, have difficulty with focusing on the right words, or have a blur in the different thing. The top one is the most common. The next one is reading. Not reading. Clearly, I read greatly. Oh, that was bad. Specific learning disorders with impairment in expression, also known as dysgraphia. So this one's very easily confused with dyslexia. But the difference here is spelling accuracy. So where dyslexia means that because you struggle to read, you think what you're writing is correct, and that's why you're not spelling accurately. Whereas dysgraphia is more meaning misspelling very simple words like the or did or things like that. That you're not going to see in a dyslexic person necessarily. The other thing is grammar and punctuation. So a dyslexic person, again, they'll generally have quite good grammar, and their punctuation won't be an issue. But, okay, well, punctuation could be an issue because of ADHD as well, because you're just in such a rush to write that you forget to add your full stops and what. But this is way more common in people with dysgraphia. And then clarity and organization of written expressions. So I once worked with a dysgraphic child who was 12 years old and could not write you a sentence because she would get so confused with which word goes where. And a sentence would look like apple, fall, tree. Because where the go, the apple, the tree, all of those the's get a little bit confusing. And that was a very extreme case. And because of her difficulties with writing, she had such an aversion to even using pens that we started with her with speech to text, dictation functions. And then we moved on to typing because that has autocorrect, so that helped her quite a bit. And then we moved on to writing. She's now 15 years old, and she is doing very well. She's achieving B aggregates in her work, and this is the same child that at one stage we thought would never finish school. So again, with the correct help, these things don't disappear, but we can get systems in place to help with them. The last one, and the one that people know the least about, is dyscalculia. So dyscalculia is the easiest way to explain it, dyslexia, but with math. So where a dyslexic person might struggle to, interpret written things, a dyscalculia person will struggle to interpret mathematical work. So I have worked with a dyscalculia student for the last 3 years. I see her a couple of times a week. She is 14 years old, and she's currently doing grade 2 math because she cannot remember what plus and minus mean and how to switch those things around. So it has to do with difficulties memorizing arithmetic facts, which means what does a plus mean? What does a minus mean? What does a decimal mean compared to what does a full stop mean? All of these things. Accurate and fluent calculations. So for example, my dyscalculia student, she can add things up when they're written underneath each other, but she can't add them up when they're written in a row because her brain can't see how those things connect. And she is a very, very severe case of this, but this can also just look like in making differences when it says plus, doing minusing and things like that. And then mathematical reasoning. And I would say this is one of the most impairing things in a dyscalculia person's life, because we don't realize how much math there is in our daily lives. For example, how many milliliters are in a liter? How many meters are there in a kilometer? Those type of things. They don't have the capacity to do that. Will this fit into that bag? That's not something they can do. If the question is 3 marks, how much do I write? That's all mathematical reasoning. And those are things that are deeply impairing and deeply frustrating. So with dyscalculia, what we often see is that their marks don't just suffer in math, it suffers all across the board, because that mathematical reasoning that is expected in a lot of other subjects is not there, and they weren't given ways to accommodate it. But if you know that, hey, I can't necessarily imagine what a liter looks like, I can, though, carry a Coke bottle around. Or I can walk with a 1 liter water bottle with different increments measured when I go shopping, because that's not weird, that's just quite normal. And that's what she does. She has a water bottle that has very nice little increments of how much you should drink a day and what the milliliter measurement is by that. And when she wants to go out and needs to somehow calculate capacity, that's what she uses, which again is a skill that she can have. But before that, her parents were deeply frustrated with her by, why won't my child even attempt to read time? Why is my child being lazy? Why does she want to do these things? Right, so like I mentioned, the biggest myth with this stuff is that these people are less intelligent, which is so not the case. This is all about being a difference between what is expected of your intelligence compared to what you are able to achieve. And I think if you're going to talk about this, if your child is ever diagnosed with a learning disability, or if you have a learning disability, or if you're talking about learning disabilities, this is the fact I think we should drive home, is having a learning disability is not a marker of your intelligence. It is your ability to fit into the box that society wants you to fit into. And honestly, I don't very much like that box. So let's really do that, because the social implications of this, when kids think that that a kid with dyslexia is stupid, and the things they say about it is gut-wrenchingly awful. So I have included links here to the specific things to look out for dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. And if you are concerned about your child or a student or something, please go read up more about these. These have been sent to you. If you want to have a discussion about, is this concerning or is this normal, you can always reach out to me as well. Yes? Yeah, fair enough. Cool. Then I'm going to go to the next one, which is things that... things that our community can do to help, which is provide multiple formats. So for example, we are going to give both the verbal instructions and a written instruction. We're going to have pictures as well as verbal instructions. As many formats as we can to make information accessible, right? We do not want to force participation, but we do want to offer alternatives. So you might not be great at reading, right? So I'm not going to force you to read out loud. But I am going to ask you if you could highlight the important things that you think are important. Or you can give us a summary of the story after we read it. Or you can hand out the pages that we're going to read in Sunday school. All of those things, while we're drawing in those people, while still respecting their limitations. Then we also want to avoid assumptions about abilities and rather ask what they can do and what they need help with. So like I mentioned, like I really can't read out loud, but my husband's great at it. And we have the same diagnosis in terms of dyslexia. So let's ask, like, would you like to read? And a very important thing here is the phrasing around it. So if you are a Sunday school teacher, if you're a teacher, if you're leading a Bible study, would you like to read for us instead of can you read for us? Because I could do it, I just really don't want to. So use the would you like to. There's no force implied there. And if you don't want to, what else would you like to do? Let's make those things accessible. Let's make everybody involved. We also want to encourage and respect the use of assistive technology and self-advocacy. If a child says, I am not going to read off of a piece of paper, I would rather read off my phone, respect that. Because the font on their phone they can change to a font that they can easily read, whereas the font on a piece of paper, I can't change that. We want to encourage those things. We don't want to say that dictation functions are lazy. No, it's a use of technology to make life more accessible, right? So we're going to encourage those stuff. We want to break instructions and longer questions down into smaller, simpler steps. So a general advice, and you'll see that I follow this throughout my PowerPoint here today as well, is we don't want paragraphs, we want bullet points. Anything you write in a paragraph, you can write in bullet points. It just makes it a lot easier to interpret for anybody with any form of neurodiversity. And the last thing is offer extra time to process information and complete tasks, right? So would you like an extra 5 minutes while we go outside? Would you like, when you're done, draw a picture instead of when you're done, raise your hand type of thing? That way we're including everyone. We're making sure that everybody feels comfortable in the spaces that we're creating. Right. Here we have a couple of really good resources for various learning disabilities and things. I have personally used every single one of them, either for myself or for a student I have. And yeah, read aloud functions, they are free, they're easy to use, and they're accessible. Nothing is stopping you. And even if you don't have a learning disability, these are great tools, like Notebook LM, especially for older students, okay, who need to gather a lot of information. It literally takes the resource that you're giving it, so a journal article in my case, and creates a conversational podcast out of it from AI. Like, it's so cool, and it's free, right? So if I need to read 8 journal articles, before I go read them and hear terms I've never tried saying before, I just pop it into Notebook LM. It's not a replacement, but it is a way of making it more accessible in the future, right? Cool. Now, I love this section. Like, okay. Autism spectrum disorder, or autism, is a neurodevelopmental disability that affects communication, behavior, and the way you process information. Approximately 1.5% of people globally are affected by autism. Autism has such stigma around it. I cannot tell you how many times people have told me, but you don't look autistic. And my favorite response to that is, thank you, it's because I'm so pretty. What, did I say something socially inappropriate? Who would have thought? Right? So let's break apart autism. So autism has 3 parts. Only 2 of these are technically diagnostic criteria, but the one part is under the other one. So, and this isn't diagnostic criteria, so it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Right, so the first one is restrictive, repetitive patterns of behavior, interest, or activities. In short, I like what I like and I don't like what I don't like, and don't force me to do otherwise, right? Very simple. My hyperfixation, my restricted interest is neurodiversity. This is why I love doing this, because I just get to talk about the thing that I like the most in the world and discuss it endlessly. That also means certain repetitive patterns of behavior. So organizing the candy that I eat before I eat them into color order. Needing to have dinner at exactly 6 p.m. and if it's not 6 p.m., I will not eat the dinner. Yeah, that's a real example. That was my life for a couple of years, where if we did not follow the exact routine that my brain needed, I could not function. My poor parents did their absolute best and they had a high-maintenance kid. But that's okay. Then in terms of interest, again, I like what I like, I don't like what I don't like. I have a kid whose special interest is collecting rocks. She doesn't want to know where the rocks come from. She doesn't want to know anything about the rocks. She just wants to collect the rocks and line up the rocks, right? Which, that is her special interest. That's what she does. We once went swimming with this kid in a dam, And she was wearing a long-sleeved swimming costume. And she put rocks up her sleeves into her costume to the point where she could not undress herself later, and was walking like this with her rocks in her. To this day, her mother is not allowed to take away one of those rocks out of her room. It literally looks like a nursery in that child's room, but she loves it, right? But don't try giving her a gemstone, because that's not a rock. That is a fake rock, according to her, right? Then activities as well is, I have a certain way that I like to do things, and that's the way I'm going to do it. And there's quite extreme emotional distress when these things are forced to be done otherwise, okay? That is the big thing. We all have preferences, right? We all know that we like to eat at a certain time-ish. We all have foods we prefer, but this is extreme versions of that. And again, like with ADHD, just because you have one of those things doesn't mean you're autistic. We're talking about things causing significant clinical disruptions to your life in all areas of functioning. It's not just affecting your home life, it's affecting everything. And it can be very debilitating. The next part is social interactions and communication differences. And I'm going to go a bit more into this in detail, but basically, autistic people are wired to communicate one way, and neurotypical people expect communication in a different way. So obviously, that has a lot of implications with social interactions and making friends and understanding the communication of others. But there's also a lot of mental effort that goes into communicating for autistic people, because we are expected to follow the script that the neurotypical world has decided, and that script makes no sense to us. The last thing is sensory processing differences. So there are two things here, even sensory seeking or sensory avoidant. So in other words, I either constantly need the physical stimulation, chewing on my pencil, I need it, or I am terrified of loud sounds, I cannot handle it at all. But let's look at these in detail. So, social interactions and communication differences. According to the diagnostic criteria, all three of these need to be present. So, struggles with back and forth social interactions and sharing of experiences. So, when somebody sees this diagnostic criteria, they go, okay, cool, but like, you can speak in conversations, so like obviously you're not autistic, but this is more nuanced than that. So back and forth social communications mean appropriately back and forth social communications. While I can have a conversation following the rules that were laid out to me by my therapist and my parents, naturally all I really want to do is tell you that your buttons are skewed, but I can't do that because you find that offended generally, which I still don't understand, but it's fine. The other thing is sharing of experience, that oversharing thing or undersharing thing, that's quite big. You'll also see people with higher support needs generally respond to questions like, would you like some ice cream? With things like, ice cream comes from cows. Right? That's an experience being shared, but that's not an appropriate way of sharing that said experience. The next one is issues with nonverbal communication. Statistically, if we're going to analyze communication, approximately 75% of what we say or what we communicate is done non-verbally. 75% of normal neurotypical communication is non-verbal. Think of eye contact, think of facial expressions, think of your body language, all of these things. 75% of that. For autistic people, it's between 10 and 20%. Do you see that big difference, right? So we place a lot more emphasis on what is said verbally compared to what is implied with your nonverbal interactions. So things like sarcasm, done, right? Inappropriate jokes, right over their head. A lot of these things, right, just do not, they just don't click. And a lot of that, because we don't rely that much on nonverbal communication, autistic people can come across as very rude. I cannot make eye contact with you while actually listening to what you're saying, right? You have you have two choices. Either I make eye contact with you or I listen to what you say. I can't do both at the same time. Don't expect me to do both at the same time. And this is something that deeply frustrated my parents and grandparents as a child, because I would be looking at my phone, or I will be looking at this toy or at the dog, and to them it seemed that I was not listening. To me, it seemed absurd that you want me to listen and look at you. Like, what is wrong with you? Right? And those type of things are things that when we understand what autism means, when we understand the limitations that autism places, those don't seem rude anymore. They just seem different. Then struggling creating, keeping, and understanding relationships. Oh my goodness, this is a big one, right? Again, because social things are so different for the neurotypical brain compared to the autistic brain, this is very hard. Every day I came home from school, especially in primary school, my mom and I had a debriefing session. My mom is, for context, my mom is a play therapist. Ooh, what have I done? Okay, no, we're fine. Okay, so for context, my mom is a social worker and play therapist. So I was very lucky to have a mom who could do this with me. But we had to come home and dissect every part of my day. So, why would the girl said she liked my hair, and then later tell me it's ugly? Like, that makes no sense. Meanwhile, she was being sarcastic. So, you know what I mean? That type of stuff. But this was so emotionally draining for me. Another thing I really didn't understand was why a teacher would tell me well done on a test paper and then scream at the whole class for not listening. Because I was listening. Why am I being shouted at? Right? Those type of things make very big differences. And when you become an adult, you see this in romantic relationships as well. Right? You don't understand the emotional advances being made. You don't understand that, hey, maybe we should talk about, do we want kids? Do we want to be in a long-term relationship? Means we're implying we're going to get married soon, right? Which deeply impacts the relationships that we're creating. However, when you see two autistic people having a relationship, these rules don't apply. And those of you who noticed my husband laughing, that's because we are both very neurodiverse, and our relationship seemed very absurd to anybody from the outside, but we very much, the first date we had, discussed, do we want children? Do we want to live? Where do we want to live? What do we plan on doing with our lives? Okay, cool. If we do get married, where's our wedding going to be, and what are these things? Right, absurd that you would discuss that on a first date, but to us it made very much sense, because why would I be dating you if I don't plan on marrying you? Like, obviously we should figure these things out. I don't want to be wasting my time. And thank goodness this man responded very politely and very well to this conversation. The first time he told me he loved me, I told him, you can't say that, and then told him, okay, we need to talk about this first. And after a couple of conversations, I told him I loved him too. I love you. Right, so these things, again, for my husband, these things weren't weird or strange or wrong. But for a neurotypical person, these things would likely be quite concerning and quite disrespectful. The next thing, let's look at restrictive, repetitive patterns of behavior, interest, and activities. So, engaging in repetitive actions, interactions with objects, or patterns of speech. So there's like very fancy words for this that I'll mention later, but basically repeating movie scripts. Repeating specific phrases like, I don't even want to say this, but thankfully they aren't young kids. Those of you who do have tweens, 6, 7. Yeah. So there are normal amounts of repeating that, and then you have the kid who's at home repeating that for 3 hours straight. Like, that's a bit much, y'all. That's a bit much. For me and my brother, it was repeating movie scripts. Right? We would memorize movie scripts and repeat those as normal conversations. You talking to me about what food I want, I'm going to tell you what the B movie says at Act 3, Line 4. Right? Those type of things. And then repetitive interactions with objects. So pushing a ball the whole time against the wall. It's not annoying at all. It's not distracting at all. I don't want to stop it at all. Those are type of things that happen, right? Arranging things in order, needing the crayons to be arranged before we can start coloring pictures. Those are some prime examples. Demanding routine or patterns of behavior. we need to wake up, we need to follow the same route to school, all of those things. I remember when I was in high school, my mom used to take me to school because my brother and I were in different schools later, and my dad took my brother, my mom took me, and one day my dad dropped me off. And he took a different route than mom. And I would tell him that's wrong. Like, why would you? It's not that we're getting to the same place at the same time for the exact same reason. It is you are taking the wrong route, obviously, because this isn't the route we always take. My dad also really likes to tell the story of him taking us to the DVD store when we were kids. And him showing us this really cool DVD and this is a great movie for family movie night. And us looking at him like, why would we take that one? We haven't watched it before. Are you mad? We have a thing going here. Why are you changing it, Dad? Right? So those are all things that repetitive patterns of behavior can look like. It can also look like hitting yourself. It can also look like hitting your head against a wall. It can also look like rocking. It can also look like not being able to write an exam because the questions are labeled wrong and you have to do the questions in order. All of these things are ways that this can look. It's so much more than what we think it is. It's so much more than what we see in Forrest Gump or Rayman or whatever other white male portrayal of autism you saw on television that one time. It's so much more than that. And it's so different for everyone. And then limited and focused special interest. I've mentioned a bit of this before, but this could be such a wide variety of things, right? And it doesn't mean necessarily only one thing, and it doesn't mean things aren't shifting over times. It just means that I don't want to talk about the other things. I want to talk about what pencil case I want. That's it, right? But this can also be with emotions, right? So that constant kid who just cannot understand why that one friend made that one comment and needs to keep talking about it and keep talking about it and keep talking about it and keep talking about it until we have we cannot talk about it more, right? That is also a specific interest, a very specific interest. We generally call the positive version of this a hyperfixation, because you are hyperfixating on these things. Right, the last thing here is sensory processing differences. So sensitivity to sensory inputs like sights, sounds, tastes, smells, or physical feelings, right? Dropping this is met with a wah! Right? Not being able to go to the mall because it's too overstimulating. There are ways around this stuff, and if these are things that you or your child is struggling with, please talk to me about it afterwards, or send me a mail, or go see an occupational therapist, because there are so many options here, and unfortunately we as a society don't know about them. When I go to church, I sit with earplugs in, just to lower the sounds a little bit. When I go to the mall, I have my headphones, which are there on the floor, just in case you guys get a little bit loud, right? Those are things that these things involve. It involves taking labels off of shirts. It involves eating a specific texture only. It involves blending the vegetables in your food because he cannot handle the texture of the vegetables, right? These are all things that can be done. But again, if we don't know that these are issues, if we don't know that is why your child comes home crying every time after you went on a shopping trip, you're going to think the kid is just really ungrateful for the new things they got, right? But in the meantime, they're so overstimulated that they physically cannot process what is happening around them. Then difficulties with processing new sensory information, right? So pain, not responding to pain appropriately, right? This is a new sensation that my foot is broken. I don't know that, okay? I've broken 2 ribs and didn't realize it for 2 days, right? Until I looked in the mirror and saw a dent in my ribs and was like, Mommy? Right? Because that wasn't the thing I was thinking about. The label on my back of my shirt is way more annoying than this new thing, right? These are things. Not responding to temperatures properly, that's the thing. My husband is one of those people who will absolutely not know if he's cold or hot. Like, he needs the weather app to tell him what his temperature regulation should be, because it's not something that he responds to, and that's okay. It just means he's found a system to accommodate for that. Because after somebody wore a jacket in 40-degree weather and almost fainted, they realized they needed to adjust. Not that I was concerned or anything. Then experiencing sensory inputs more intensely, right? So being very sensitive to sensory inputs. And when we say very sensitive, it doesn't mean necessarily avoiding them, but just feeling them deeply. So you might be sensory seeking, so you might need this fidgeting sensation all the time. But why do you need that? I'm so sorry. Why do you need that? Right? That is a different sensation being feeling. That sound very intensely, but I needed to regulate myself. Right. So autism is different for everyone. And I don't know if you've heard of everybody's autistic nowadays, or have you realized that more people are being diagnosed with autism, right? This is a very common thing I hear. But isn't everyone a little autistic? No. Everybody has symptoms of autism, but not everybody is autistic, right? And part of the reason why we're seeing more people be diagnosed with autism is because we changed what we look for. Up until the 1980s-ish, we weren't diagnosing women with autism. Like, we thought it was impossible. Just like, whoops, no, it's only for boys, right? That's the thing. And then in 2013, we changed it. We don't call it Asperger's anymore. That is now bridged into autism. We don't call it Rett's disorder anymore. We threw it in with autism, right? And then the old autism is now made up of it. So all people who had these 3 different diagnoses are all grouped into one, which is very great because now we can support all of them with the similar technologies. Everybody has access to the same interventions. But that does make us kind of feel like, okay, well, everybody's autistic nowadays. The other thing we need to realize as well is that the more we as a society populate, the more we're spreading that genetic material for autism to be more prominent, okay? And again, that's not a bad thing. That just happens. And the final thing is we are talking about it now, right? Could you imagine us having this conversation 20 years ago? Okay, I can't because I was like 2, but we just don't say it, right? So what we used to say, like, she's just a little bit pedantic and her plates are on the wall and she has a collection of teacups in her cupboard that we're not allowed to touch, but that's just grandma. We now call that autism, right? And again, that's not a bad thing. We're accommodating the needs of those people who are forced to fit into society, who are forced to pretend that they're okay when they weren't okay. Okay, so we have 3 levels now of autism. Level 3 is your most severe, and I'm not going to go through all of this stuff. You can read through it on your own. But basically, level 3 autism is considered high support needs autism, meaning you need constant, lifelong support. And whatever systems we put in place, you're still going to always need more, right? These are the things that we think of when we think profound autism. Not being speaking, not having ability to switch between things, that type of thing. These people don't generally go undiagnosed. These people are diagnosed, so this is what we commonly think of autism. In between that, we have level 2 autism, or high support needs, or moderate autism, right? Now, when I was diagnosed with level 2 autism. A diagnosis of a level autism doesn't necessarily mean that you are forever going to be in this classification. If I was to classify myself at this moment, which I probably shouldn't do because I'm not qualified to do so, I would say I much more fall into the level 1 autism category nowadays. But we're looking at the profile in front of us. But I needed all of these things for a very long time to be able to get where I am now. So it's consistent support, right, is required, but we can put systems in place to make your life possible, make your life easier. I was able to live alone with the right systems in place, okay? But I'm not able to go to the doctor by myself. I'm not able to drive without my service dog with me. I'm not able to go to the mall by myself. It's way too overstimulated. I can't do it. And that's okay. But I have found systems in place to minimize the impact these things have on me. And the thing over here as well is the amount of internal distress that there generally is, that is more with a level 2 compared to a level 1. So level 1 autism, which is what we used to call Asperger's syndrome, that is what people are most commonly misdiagnosed. Like, these are the most commonly undiagnosed people, right? Who have autism but haven't been diagnosed because their symptoms aren't severe enough. But the difficulties these people face, right? Part of why we call it level 1 and lower support needs autism is because they're able to hide it. They're able to pretend. Doesn't mean it doesn't cause them severe emotional and physical distress to do that, but they are comfortable for society to look at. We are the ones who can potentially hold full-time jobs. Doesn't mean that's not going to break us, but society will accept us because we can force ourselves to fit in. The way the difficulties for somebody with level 1 autism shows up is somewhat different than those with the more higher levels of autism. And the reason for that is because they force themselves into it. But your level 1 autistic people have the highest comorbidity with mental illness, with depression, with suicide, with anxiety, because they pretend that they're okay when they really aren't. And that is why we also have reclassified this, is because we believe as a psychological society that people, regardless of your level of autism, all need intervention, and we cannot ignore it. We cannot ignore the kid who is having difficulty with relationships. We cannot ignore the one who is struggling with change. We cannot ignore that anymore because we've seen what that does to them. Now, when we talk about the autism spectrum, a lot of people think it looks like this. It's a very nice straight line, and your levels of autism are like that. But the reality is you can be a level 1 autistic, that kind of sounds weird, but you can be level 1 autism in one sphere, like your proprioception, while being level 3 in your relationship difficulties. So the autism spectrum is way more useful if we look about it in a wheel like this, where we're saying, these are all the things you struggle with. There are different levels at which you struggle with these different things, requiring different levels of support. And we're going to acknowledge that, and we're going to support that in every way. So all of these things are part of the diagnostic criteria that we've discussed. They're just applied to the practical examples of what we're seeing. We're seeing difficulties knowing where your body is. We're seeing difficulties experiencing the world around you. We're seeing difficulties knowing when you're hungry, right? I have an autistic friend who has to set reminders to eat because she just forgets. She can't tell when she's hungry, and that's okay. She's found a way to work around it. But before she knew what her diagnosis was and before she knew what she was struggling with, she was just not eating and feeling quite dizzy by the end of the day, which is kind of problematic, right? Emotional intensity is a massive thing with autism. So even more so with ADHD, we feel things to extremes. My mom had a really nice way of explaining it, and I'm always a nix of alles, right? A 0 or a 10 on the emotional scale. This is the best day ever. This is the worst day ever, right? Okay, these are things that I said as a child. Like, these were very common conversations had in my house. And again, if you don't understand that, you're going to think your child is just being really weird. And that's okay. But having the label autism is way more helpful to get them the help they need. Another thing I just want to highlight here is the executive functioning difficulties. So hyperfocus, being super focused on a specific thing for a certain amount of time. Having demand avoidance, which is a specific profile of autism called pathological demand avoidance, which these kids, these people have such intense anxiety when they're given an instruction that they physically shut down almost. Right. I homeschooled a child with this, with PDA for quite some time, and it was the most enlightening and educational experience I've ever had in realizing how much of the instructions we get on a daily from our body, but also from the world around us, is very demanding. For example, this child could feel that she had to go to the bathroom, but she wouldn't want to give in to that demand. It was too anxiety-provoking to follow out the thing that her body is telling her to do, and then she would wet herself eventually. And again, then you think, okay, a 12-year-old's wetting herself has to be a biological issue, but when we understand that she sees going to the bathroom as such an intense demand, you understand why she's doing this, and you understand how to help her. There's also the thing of hygiene difficulties. Showering is sensory hell. The water coming down on you, the sound of the water, the smell of the soap, all of that stuff. It's, no thank you. No, it's horrid, right? It can be really difficult. Brushing your teeth, that sound, that feeling, not a great feeling. And while we can force ourselves to do it, while we can push through it, it does take a lot of energy. For me personally, bathing is way easier because I can put the water on, go outside, not listen to the sound, put it back, and then I can decide how much water touches which part of my body. You see things like that. Your kid might not want to shower, but taking a bath is fine. Then processing complex things, whether that be emotions or instructions, because I'm paying attention to so many other things, my brain just can't focus on what you're saying to me. And autistic inertia, meaning difficulty changing from one thing to another. So I really cannot stop playing my video game right now because that's just, I can't make that change right now. And again, these things look like naughty, these things look like disrespect, but they are not, right? Doesn't mean that you don't have to stop playing your video game. It just means we understand and we're going to give you a 10-minute warning, and then we're going to give you a 5-minute warning, and then we're going to give you a 2-minute warning before you stop playing your video game instead of yelling, dinner's ready. You get what I mean? And then, yeah, like I mentioned, difficulty changing tasks. So autism has a very high comorbidity. More people with autism will at least have 2 other diagnoses with that than just autism itself, okay? So when you have autism, and then we also hear that you have anxiety and you have ADHD, we're not going to be surprised and say you're making things up. We're going to say, oh, yeah, no, that makes sense, right? So I want to look at what these comorbidities are so you can understand some of the... So 65% of autistic people have ADHD. Make sense? Now, if you think of what ADHD requires, which is constant change, compared to what autism requires, which is constant sameness, you can see where they don't really like each other very much and how that can be a little bit of an issue. Yeah. Anxiety is a very big one. Learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities. Intellectual disabilities are far more common with more profound autism. And then obsessive compulsive disorder is very common. I was actually diagnosed with autism because I was first diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder and being treated for that when they were like, hey, maybe there's something else going on here. Depression is really high, but up to 80% have sleep issues. That's incredibly high, right? That's really difficult. Until I was around 14 years old, I couldn't sleep without my mom lying down with me to fall asleep at night. I still cannot fall asleep if I don't take medication to help me, right? And like, I can be real tired, but the way, like I also obviously have a physical disability, the way my best friend and my husband generally know that I'm really sick and we should probably go to hospital is if I take a nap in the afternoon. Like, then we know she's on the down spiral there, right? And there are things that can help with this, but we didn't know what to do until I had a diagnosis. And then the other thing is feeding and eating disorders, right? Because of the textural implications of eating, right? There's a lot of people who have very restricted diets when they are autistic. And that can be quite problematic, right? But again, there are ways to manage this, but you have to know that it's an issue for you to manage it. So what can we do to help autistic people in our community? Well, first, let's provide low sensory spaces. Just have a room. You can go, take a seat, have a break. We can be direct and literal in our communication. So not implying, would you like a rusk? Like, there are rusks on the table, saying that. Instead going, would you like a rusk? They are on the table. That is very helpful. We will not force unimportant social rules of politeness. Does it really matter if somebody makes eye contact with you? Does that really, really matter so much? Does it matter that they're not interrupting? Probably a little bit more than making the eye contact. Provide opportunities, provide explanations when asked why. Autism, want to understand why things are happening. I'm not being rude if I ask why. I truly just want to understand. And I think this is something we often see as rude, especially coming from teenagers. But it's a like, I just don't get it, hey? We also want to offer opportunities to be included without having to communicate verbally. So if you struggle with verbal communication, maybe write your answers on a piece of paper. Use a text-to-speech function on your phone. All of these things are options. We want to encourage and allow and accept stimming behaviors. Fidgeting really doesn't bother anyone that badly. Or if it does, maybe just go fidget in the back. It's okay. Rocking back and forth, that's okay. These things are okay, and we can accept them. We don't have to shame people for them. We also want to accommodate routine and repetitive preferences where possible. It's not always going to be possible to eat at 6 o'clock, but we can prepare you that we won't be able to eat at 6 o'clock because your parents are only arriving at the airport at 6 o'clock. So we might be eating by 6:30, but we want to prepare that in advance. So if you know your Sunday school class is going to look different this week, preparing the autistic kid is a great idea. And we want to encourage and ask about special interests. There is nothing I like more than when you ask me about autism. Like, it lights me up. Okay? And that can be different for every kid. It might be asking about their light up sparkle shoes. It might be asking about their dinosaur hoodie, right? But these are things we can do to make people feel included and accepted and loved. And we also want to amplify autistic voices. By that I mean, if we are going to talk about autism, let's ask the people who are autistic to talk about it as well. If we're going to institute a new policy about autism, we want to ask the autistic people what they think of this. And I've made it very easy for you guys to do that. Right. Here are links to a lot of autism self-advocacy networks and autistic creators and people. I myself post online about autism and advocate for autism and share my journey as a disabled autistic person. Because guess what? Hospitals are really overstimulating, guys. Like, come on, we can do better. So let's amplify those voices. Let's hear what the autistic community has to say about things. Let's repost their things instead of forcing the voices of organizations that are not very accepting, actually, of autistic people. And yeah, here are the resources for autistic people. Then, kom. Nia, do. Okay. Then what we just can do in general to support neurodiverse people is in our community, and these things, I had a conversation with a bunch of autistic people. I asked on my own Instagram profile. I've spoken to my clients and included some of my own experience here as well. The first thing is educate yourself on neurodiversity, right? So I want to give you all a hand and say, well done for doing that today, okay? Thank you for educating yourself on neurodiversity. The next most important thing is teach your children about neurodiversity. It is not a bad word to say autistic. And autism is not an insult. So let's teach them accurately what it is, that they do not have the right to diagnose their friends, and tell them that being different is okay. Let's tell them that needing more support is okay. Because children that don't understand things, they are going to be the ones to make fun of the neurodiverse kids. That's unfortunately what's going to happen. And like I said, amplify the voices of neurodiversity self-advocates and people who are in the profession speaking to self-advocates. Then we want to use inclusive language that aligns with community preferences. And if your community includes only 2 people, use the language they prefer to use. And then we want to remember that every neurodivergent person is different. Okay? And we want to ask what is the best for them. What can we do to accommodate you? We have information, but there's this saying that goes, if you've met one autistic person, you've met exactly that, one autistic person. I am not representative of my whole community. I cannot answer questions about what that kid thinks is the most sensory problematic part of this. I can give you general recommendations, but that person is going to be the expert in their experience. Awesome. And then just want to reiterate again, it is not an excuse. It is an explanation. My autism doesn't excuse me being rude to my mom because I'm overstimulated. My autism does not excuse me from shouting out obscenities in the middle of a shopping mall. But it does explain why I might need headphones to go shopping. It does explain why I might need a minute to regulate before having a conversation with my mom. So we're gonna move on to the question section now, and I'm gonna ask us to stop the recording there, please.